You're not here, mate. So you're not in here, innit?
It's getting better. Can I have a mic?
Yeah. Is that mine or his? That's his, yeah?
Is that okay?
Carry on the discussion. I go around.
I'm flexible, whatever. Yeah. No
You're
problem.
flexible.
Because I
Shall
know,
I recap where I think we were at?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I think where we were at was we were agreeing that the ideal would be a one-state solution where Palestinians and Israelis live together in harmony, yeah?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, so we agree on that ideal.
Yeah, so I think I said that it would be ideal if it's a Palestinian state under whom anyone is welcome to go and live, etc.
Yeah.
And then you said that, of course, that's ideal, but in terms of practicality, some people think the two-state solution is more practical and ideal. And then I think it just deteriorates from there in the sense that just recently, I mean, you got Zipia Tolvi. She came, she's, I think, the foreign diplomat. She's like the diplomat of Israel. She knocked it completely on the head and said, no, we're not entertaining that in the slightest.
Israel. So now what you've got is four. Still, just to reiterate, we agree on the ideal.
Exactly,
one state, okay? The two states, all I'm arguing is that a two-state solution increases the protection of the Palestinian people. If they get statehood, they won't get as exploited by Israel as they have.
Yeah.
And it gives them a platform from which they can negotiate into a one-state solution.
Yeah.
Therefore, surely, as a way of getting closer to the ideal, it's a more practical way of doing it,
Yeah.
isn't it?
I mean,
Because when you've got two people who are... Sorry.
I'm waiting for him to finish.
because the sun just comes in and comes
sun
out.
suddenly kicks
When
in
I
with the
came in, now I look like a prat.
No, you don't.
No,
you look
like
highly
you-
decorated.
No, you know when I had the scarf on really tight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, surely the two tribes need a cooling off period. Yeah? I don't think they could coexist in a one-state solution without a huge amount of violence and exploitation from maybe both sides. Yeah? So, if they need a cooling off period, aren't they better off having a cooling off period for a few years at least in a two-state situation rather than the Palestinians still being stateless refugees who are being exploited by Israel?
Tony, you know when it comes to cooling off period, just one recent example rather than going into kind of history and stuff like that. A recent example you probably had when they were told to move from the north to the south. Yeah, and they said in the south you're going to be safe. That was, they said, look, that's your cooling off period. We're just going to deal in the north.
That's not what I mean by cooling off.
No, but what I'm saying is that these are Israel as a state has shown that they don't accept a cooling off period in any form of, however you fathom it, in the sense that you want to move people from the north to the south.
Thank you.
You bomb them as they're going south. When they're in the south, you bomb them even when they're in the south. Even when there's a ceasefire, which is the definition of a cooling off period, as of one form of it, you're still bombing them. There's the ITV caught a small example of somebody that had no weapons, had a white flag. That person was no threat whatsoever.
I think we're going to agree that what Israel is doing at the moment is appalling and it should stop.
No, but what I'm saying is that this is just to kind of flesh out the point that you said about a cooling off period, because there's an assumption there that Israel will be okay and will be loyal to the idea of a cooling off period. And what I'm telling you is that we have enough instances where Israel hasn't been loyal to this idea.
But again, if we're defining the ideal.
Ideally, of course.
Okay, ideally.
Yeah.
With an understanding of human psychology,
Yes.
if all of these people now were put into one state next week, I think whoever was the majority would exploit the minority. I think if there was an Israeli majority, they would exploit the Palestinians. And I suspect that the Palestinians have had such an appalling treatment that they couldn't contain their anger if they were the majority. So either way, it wouldn't serve either side.
I don't think they would. I think that's what people are fearful that they would, but I don't think they would.
Well, I hope you're right.
Yeah.
But, okay, even if you're right and they wouldn't, I could imagine that the Israelis would be sufficiently paranoid that they wouldn't believe that the Palestinians could be that merciful and accommodating. Yeah. So just to accommodate the Israeli paranoia, pragmatically, it would still seem sensible to keep them apart for a bit, where they're not killing each other for a while. And if you're going to keep them apart for a bit, two-state solution, a temporary two-state solution, serves the interests of the Palestinian people better than still being a refugee camp. Because for 70 years, NATO, the United Nations, has said the Palestinians should have a nation. And we've been appalling in not backing it up because we've let America veto this again and again and again.
Yeah, just last week, yeah.
But internationally, for the first time, it seems the public opinion, even in America, is moving against Israel. You've got a 20-to-1 death rate consistently between Palestinians and Israelis. People are waking up to the fact that the Israeli narrative really isn't morally convincing. It really isn't. They're using numerous different strategies to obfuscate the truth. And I'd love to sit here and break down arguments against Israel till the cows come home. But before I get to do that, I'm always called a Zionist because I still believe in a two-state solution. And that's only because I need to know the answer to a question. And you're into ethics, so tell me. What should the statute of limitations be on this kind of stuff? Because it's a universal question we need to ask about in international law. And 1948 is 75 years ago. Now, at what point does conquest become legitimate ownership? Because if it was 1948, I'd just be going, Israel is behaving appallingly, the Nakba and all of that, and I wouldn't support a state of Israel in 1948. But if I'm mindful of the statute of limitations, and if I'm mindful of the fact that most of the people in this conflict didn't start it, they weren't around in 1948, they've inherited a bad situation from their forefathers, I think all of those people have rights that should be recognised, and that's the only real argument for the state of Israel I can see is the statute of limitations. So what do you think?
I can say that when it comes to the two-state solution, this was something even agreed by a specific party of the Palestinians. They had no issues, and that was the direction that the talks were being led to. That was. I think even with Yasser Arafat, and I mean this was something that all that sort of stuff did take place, and but I think ultimately the goal, and this again is a theory people posit, is Israel was never interested in the two-state solution. They've constantly put either roadblocks ahead of it, they've violated it, and the settlements are clearly a violation of a two-state solution. And here you have somebody that's not willing to play by the rules. So we can quote statutes, but how and what do you do against somebody that's a rogue, belligerent state?
Well, I think hopefully you recognise if Israel is, say, 7 million people, Netanyahu to me is despicable. Not every Israeli is in favour of Netanyahu. There's a spectrum of opinion within Israel. And last week, Adnan debated a Jewish woman who was terrific. They had a very constructive discussion where she said within the Jewish diaspora and within Israel, the tide of opinion is turning more and more against hardliners like Netanyahu and towards something like a two-state or even a one-state solution. In fact, she was in favour of a one-state solution. That tide of public opinion is really growing because Israel has shamed itself for this recent behaviour. Yeah? I'm not saying that it's a simple position for them because they got attacked and it is genuinely complicated, but nonetheless, I can't take a 20-to-1 death ratio consistently of Israelis to Palestinians or the way the Palestinians have been treated. Now, I think Netanyahu wants more radical opposition. He would far prefer Hamas, who approach this as a religious conflict, than the PLO, who approached it as a secular real estate dispute. Yeah? So he's encouraged Hamas because he knows they will alienate so much of the international community that he can then use that for his one-state solution, which is basically the Nakba part to it. It's kicking out the rest of the Palestinians. So I think Hamas are playing into his hands by framing it within a political framework. If you framed it within a secular framework, you'd have a much stronger platform, and I think international opinion then would fall against Israel, even in America, and you'd really gain some traction.
The thing is, there's both. There's that secular element, you've got the religion. But just to kind of add to the point that you mentioned, just last week there was an interview of Mehdi Hassan with an ex-prime minister of Israel that said the very thing that you've said, just in case somebody thinks it's conspiracy theory that Netanyahu is trying to prop up Hamas, that he prefers Hamas. No, this is actually a reality.
Well, I'm gambling. When I first heard the idea, I thought it was a conspiracy theory. And then the more I heard about it, did you watch the debate on Lex Fridman with Finkelstein, 4 of them for about 5 hours?
Yeah, I don't know what Destiny was doing there, but so I'd say 3 of them.
Well, I'll always defend the underdog. I know they said all he knows is Wikipedia, but you can make good points without having huge amounts of facts, yeah? Nonetheless, in that, they all did seem to agree.
You can, but like for him, maybe another YouTuber would have been great.
I think, yeah,
but
he was the weakest. I thought the best guy was.
He was the weakest link.
Yeah. What was his name? The guy who was with Finkelstein.
I don't know, but
good.
yeah, he was good.
And it was a good discussion. 5 hours. It was constructive. Anyway, they all seem to agree that when Israel felt most vulnerable was when they said the Palestinians tried a peace offensive, which was being ironic because normally it's a military offensive. That what Israel didn't want, I think, around about the time of Oslo, was the idea that the Palestinians might become peaceful. The more extremists like Netanyahu,
exactly.
They want hostility, and they want the most extreme form of hostility to rationalize how they can create their one state, which is to eject everybody. So it's difficult.
It's actually been said in the Israeli parliament that I've actually got the quote. Where they're saying that Hamas is actually preferred. It's preferred because Hamas will catalyze them getting and usurping more land. Hamas is the perfect opposition for them because you probably heard what have majority of the discussions, especially on mainstream media, been geared towards. I mean, from the get-go, whether it's Piers Morgan, whether it's CNN, it all started with, do you condemn Hamas? So the whole conversation...
I think that's a reasonable question, but I think equally you should ask, do you condemn the IDF?
But my point is the fact that this whole thing has been centered around this group, that they are trying to prop up, that they are trying to make it seem like the center of the argument, when the center of the argument is occupation. Settler colonial occupation. Like that's the crux of the issue. Like you said, there's an extremist party over there. You got the IDF, you got extremists like Netanyahu, you've got the extremist who he's had to Ben Gavir, who's an...
the keys, let me get umbrellas just in case.
It's going to rain. Okay.
I've got a brolly, if that helps. We can share a brolly or...
It's up to you. Yeah, if you want to.
Yeah, just in case.
Yeah, that's fine. So even when it comes to Ben Gavir, who had a picture of a known terrorist who killed innocent Palestinians, and he had a framed picture of him in his in his office or in his house. So there's a lot of ridiculous stuff. But how the media has made it about an organization when Hamas isn't even the only, like, when we're talking about Palestinian resistance, Hamas is a faction of that. They're not the only ones that are fighting.
I get it. So in order to help me and other people who are laymen to frame it, my assumption is I should start by looking at 1948, I know the history goes back before 1948, but 1948 seems to be the pivot point for this. And that's because that's when the State of Israel was declared. Is that a reasonable foundational point to start from?
I think
it's not October the 7th. October the 7th is not the beginning of this story.
I would say before 1947, because it didn't happen at 1947. And if Israel has been given a state in 1947, that doesn't mean that's when it starts. It means that is a what do they call it?
Catalyst?
No, like a milestone.
Okay.
That's a milestone, but in order to reach that milestone, you will have had to traverse something. Like things don't happen in a vacuum. So similarly, for you to start at 1947 when they've been given a state...
could we say post-war, 45 to 48? That seems to be when...
starting before, when, for example... I think if you are to talk about the whole thing, you talk about the whole thing. Talk about when the Palestinians were called the Philistines. Talk about when, because...
Now, how far back are we going? Because I'm really into the statute of limitations, and when I see Netanyahu and Ben Shapiro...
I say pre-Canaanite time.
Okay, now maybe we can have a proper disagreement. Okay. When Ben Shapiro and Netanyahu give their explanation about how we need to frame the conflict, their openers are, if you want to understand the conflict, you've got to go back 3,000 years. And my eyes immediately go, no, I don't. No, I do not. Because what I'm looking for... Do you know Umar Suleiman?
I know Umar, yeah.
Okay, who was again on Lex Fridman. I thought he was very eloquent on the Palestinian plight. He's in favour of a two-state solution. and he's condemned the international law. He said we need international laws to adjudicate this, yeah? If we'd had international laws with teeth that treated everybody equally, we wouldn't be in this.
Yeah.
So the international community should be ashamed of itself.
Yes.
So you need a framing device for international laws which can work.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can do that based on arguments that go back 3,000 years. It's just impossible. Yeah?
Shall I tell you why he may suggest 3,000 years? You don't have to agree with him or disagree with him. It's the fact that they deny Palestinians were in that land and that there were evidences for that. That's why then we'd have to go back at that time and talk about the Philistines, talk about evidence of markings and archaeological evidence and coins, etc., that do evidence that the Palestinians were there, that they have been mentioned in the text when they're trying to wipe us from history.
So whatever happened to the group of people we never met 3,000 years ago, how does that change the actual ethics of what happened to people in 1948 who are still alive today who were displaced? I'm interested in the living far more than the dead. So although I want to learn the history of what happened in the past, the statute of limitations I think we should embrace internationally is if you're alive and you committed a crime, you're answerable for the crime. And if you're alive and you were abused, then you should be compensated. Yeah? So for example, if you were kicked out of your house in 1948 and you're still alive, you should get it back. Once you're dead, you move into a second ethical category. Because at that point you've been judged by God, and once you've been judged by God, it's a distinct line that we can understand objectively. Are you alive or dead? If alive, still answerable. So I think if we could internationally use that as a statute of limitations, a primary statute of limitations, still informed by the history. We need to know the history. You can go back as far as you can go back 3,000 years if you want, but that's dead history. At some point the past becomes the past, and I think it's when the individual dies.
And that's obviously it's up to you, isn't it? It's up to you where you want to start. But I just gave you the kind of reasoning behind why some people would want to go before and would want to start. You can start when you want. It's a choice that you have.
Well, not all starting points are equal. I'm pitching very much the living dead thing, and I think when Shapiro and Netanyahu...
So you're saying that the border that was there at that time, that's the border that we need to be working towards, because they're there now and we can't, get them to move. So why don't we just stick with that? Is that?
I think my only argument for the existence of the State of Israel is nearly all of the people there got born there, and it wasn't their choice. You're responsible for your choices, not your inevitabilities. Everyone's got to get born somewhere. Although they gained it through what I think was largely conquest and unfairly, there must come a point in history at which you go, it wasn't your choice to be born here as an individual, I have to now acknowledge you have some rights. Now, even though a lot of them, not all of them, have abused that position of power subsequently, nonetheless, because they didn't choose it and they got born into it, to me that gives them just enough human rights that maybe the State of Israel should be considered as ethically viable. It wouldn't have been ethically viable in 48. I think they were traumatized people. They had the Holocaust. They made very bad decisions. They were very blinkered. And I think the next generations have grown up with very traumatized parents and hyper-paranoid.
I can see the point that you're...
Does this make any sense?
Yeah, I can see the point that you're coming with, but the only issue with that would be that if I was a state and I noticed, so-and-so got away with it because enough time had elapsed, therefore, India is following the footsteps of Israel in terms of how it treats its minorities, in terms of how it's talking about, in terms of the secular, religious aspect, many things.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that it will open the floodgates for other nations and states to do the same thing with disputed territories. You might even see...
Use what axiom? My axiom is if you're alive or dead. Your axiom seems to be, I have to go back 3,000 years. I think strategically, the Netanyahus and Shapiros of this world are using that to obfuscate and confuse the issue. If you just chuck out all the claims that go back beyond living memory as being primary, suddenly they can't make those arguments. The second argument they use a lot is God gave us the land. We can't do that in international law either. We can't do 3,000-year claims, it's not functional. We can't do God-based arguments. Another argument they use is they go, we cultivated the land in the way the Palestinians didn't, which is fallacious.
But just because they're making arguments doesn't mean that that's the starting point for us. They can make all the arguments they want. It doesn't mean that their arguments are right or that they're justified.
I think their arguments are, those three arguments are blatantly wrong. The 3,000-year-old argument, forget it. You can't do it in international law. The God gave us the land, you can't do it in international law. And the one about we cultivated the land is akin to saying if you bought a car and then you didn't look after it well and polish it, then I come by and I go, hey, I'm going to steal your car.
I've heard that,
polish it, right? It's a lousy argument. When you buy the car, that includes your option to not polish it.
Yeah.
So we don't need to waste any time being distracted by arguments about God, 3,000 years, or the land stuff. And then I ask, what have you got left? And the only claim I think they've got is to go, look, we've been here 75 years. I'm sorry that it happened immorally and unethically for the most part, but it was also complicated, and we're human beings.
But Tony, I think this will encapsulate both of our stances accurately. And it's okay to have both stances. We don't have to agree on one stance. My stance is like that of Malcolm X, which he said that if someone stuck a knife within you, if they take it out 6 inches, that doesn't now mean that you should be grateful for that you should be happy for that.
For sure.
It's take the knife out, heal the wound. Take the knife out. So that argument of, let's start in 1947, let's start, it's like, okay, let's take it out 6 inches. It's been taken out 6 inches, it's fine, let's just leave it the way it is, because I'm saying no. That's unacceptable. The knife should be removed completely, because we need to look at the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is we don't want floodgates to open, that other nation states start doing the exact same thing.
I'm not...
Let's just move down here. Because you're saying a lot of people walk past and...
I'm not totally getting your inference that the way this is dealt with will echo out into all the other jurisdictions like India and so on. I'm not getting how inevitable that connection is.
So what I'm saying is that let's just say a country has enough power and might that they colonize a certain land. Once they've colonized a certain land, then people live and they die and time passes and they get certain consulates coming into their areas and, justifying and saying, look, we're with you, because they have a lot of international voice. Time passes, generation passes. That doesn't mean what they've done is okay.
So you have to write the history books accurately. Israel would have to acknowledge the history of the Nakba, etc., acknowledge that it took the land largely by force and there were a lot of atrocities committed, etc. If it could write the history book accurately on those points and go, however, new generations have now been born here, we would like to coexist. Start by instantly recognizing a Palestinian state, which should have been recognized for 70 years, with an eye to then using that as a negotiating platform towards one-state integration, which is the ideal that you and I were both agree on.
I got that.
Is that not a tenable synthesis of all of the stuff?
Look, both are tenable points. The thing is, I'm taking the moral argument a bit further than that, and I'm saying it's unacceptable from the get-go. And I understand your thing. Your thing does claim to be practical, and I'm not denying
and universal. It needs to be international. I mean, for example, with regard, to reparations for slavery and all of that. Until the international community hammers out an idea about what a statute of limitations is, once you've got that objectively defined, you can apply it in all jurisdictions of discussion. Reparations for slavery, etc. Until then, you're floundering, and it just becomes rhetoric, and you get tactically misdirected by people like Netanyahu.
I got you. I think your stance is somewhat more balanced than a lot of people, and I think you do look at certain nuances, and some people will agree with that stance as well.
Where am I weak? Where's the weakness in my thinking?
The weakness is in what I've said, isn't it? In terms of...
You still think it's immoral?
Yeah, I do think it's immoral that just because a certain amount of time has passed, certain generations have passed, that now becomes the starting point, that becomes the phase from which you begin.
I'm framing it in religious terms, of the line between when God has judged an individual and hasn't. I mean... You're Muslim, and I'm kind of into spirituality generally, and I see such a clear ethical and metaphysical distinction between someone who has lived a life, made their choices and been judged by God, as opposed to someone who is still living their life and still making choices which will then be judged by God. I would have thought that was an objective line that you might...
Not necessarily, but the thing is, Tony, why does it have to be there? Like if America cares so much about Israel, they've got enough land, and just now they've okayed 23 billion to Israel. In fact, since the beginning, estimates suggest that they've given Israel 150 billion. Now, under this estimate of 150 billion, if they took this 150 billion and invested it in their own country and gave Israel a nice little spot there, near California or Florida or wherever, use the 150 billion there, then you save all that money, frankly.
I in my heart, I agree with
That's
okay. If it was 1948, I would say definitely give the Jewish people a state, which is safe, but not on that bit of real estate. They naturally gravitated to the place where their mythology and their heritage was, and they became blinkered, I think. This is my thesis. So I understand why they made that decision, and they were traumatized, which cuts them some slack. Nonetheless, it was a bad decision. So in 1948, no. If you could persuade them now to all ship out, international community could pay for a thing.
From my conversation with you, Tony, I don't think you're a Zionist. I don't think you're unreasonable.
Thank you.
I think you're being pragmatic. You're exploring both sides. You're listening.
And you.
And I appreciate that. And that's all we can do. Hear both sides and acknowledge the mistakes of the sides, and hope that what's going on now will, with whatever's going, will happen with as few casualties as possible of innocent people.
I think what we can also do is half of the planet are voting this year. 4 billion people are voting. The tide of public opinion will affect this, and you want to persuade people who are persuadable in the Jewish diaspora and worldwide. So if you can give fact-based, objective arguments that they think are coming from a reasonable source, they can chew those over, and you can affect things that way. Now, I put it to you, I talk statute of limitation. I think one principle I hope we all agree with is the principle of consistency. You can't have two simultaneous things which are in opposition to each other. An object can't be there and be here. That's the principle of contradiction. Which is in philosophy and so on.
I'm okay with that, but
I'm okay with that as well.
Okay, that's good.
This is Plato's principle, but whoever wants to claim it, this is the cornerstone axiom of all inference, is that you can't have contradictory situations. So I can demand consistency from whoever I talk to. Now, I've heard people such as Bill Maher, who generally I rather like, argue that the Palestinians should let it go now. It happened.
What do you like about him?
I like the fact that he believes there's objective truth and objective reality, and it's not woke. I like that he likes freedom of speech. I like that for the most part he's got a good sense of humour. He's quite courageous, and he stands up to a lot of trends which might make him unpopular. But I think he and a lot of other people, when it comes to Israel, they get blinkered.
Israel, Iraq, American policy, it's blinkered in a lot of things. Even his view on Islam as well. I mean, so the clip of Ben Affleck, and then his discussion with Glenn Greenwald as well.
On that one, actually, I was with him and not with Ben Affleck. Look, I want to be totally open about who I am and what I believe. I'm not in favour of the more fundamentalist aspects of religion, okay? The reason that I try and get on so well with people of multiple religions, including Muslims, is because I think the core tenets of the practice, etc., are quite probably divinely inspired and good. They do a lot of good for people in practice, and I respect the diligence of their faith and that practice, okay? It doesn't mean I buy all of the small print of the belief system, because I don't. I am in favour of democracy, because I think for all of the bad things that you'll have noticed has happened from democratic states, and they have. Democracy is just embodying the notion that I reserve the right to change my mind, to try something and change my mind. That's what's implicit. And I think in all aspects of life, we all live that way.
What do you think about Plato's view on democracy?
Educate me. Go on.
I mean, he was, from my readings, he was anti-democracy. He was against the fact that you should give such important decisions to the lay people who just drive the country into the ground.
Well, there's an argument to be made there. You can end up with an electorate which is so ignorant that it's
like some people argue what happened with Brexit.
You can't ignore the strength of that argument. As we become more and more sophisticated technologically and economically, people become less and less capable of making informed decisions when they vote. You could counter-argue that should tell the society to slow down a bit and not keep accelerating so fast. Because what democracy appeals to is the idea that the slowest person on the train that you're on, you've got to bring them with you. You can't cut them loose. We stick together as a tribe, as a species, and we support the weaker and less intelligent people and try not to run ahead of the game. So it's a balancing act.
So you think educating the community, educating the country?
Maybe if your technology is moving so fast that people can't keep up with it, maybe that's a sign you should slow down the tech a bit. I'm not a lover.
Don't you think that's a bit naive though to assume that that's even possible?
It may be, but I think possibly the consequences of not doing that may be really catastrophic.
Because when you've got leaders that are, let's face it, motivated by profit and power, not motivated by objective morality, or a facade of objective morality, then they are going to want to line their own pockets, stay in power as long as possible, and that's going to be against the interests of the people that they are ruling. And that's why you've got AI, so many people warning against AI, warning for controlled measures against AI, but because we're just so interested in getting more and more land and more influence, that's why you're seeing AI being manipulated in ways, I mean, sure you're familiar with Black Mirror and the likes, that it's fantastic. In the sense that
Charlie Brooker,
done a fantastic job. But in the sense that it's now going to be used against these nefarious forces that already have got a lot of control and influence over us, that are trying to, Noam Chomsky's words, manufacture our consent just so they can continue their power and influence and their profit. So I don't think somebody that lacks objective moralities, some individuals that are part of secret societies that do these...
There's a bit more of a space opening up between us. When we start talking secret societies, I think there are people out there, but I try and avoid the conspiracy theory.
So am I. That's why I'm keeping it something that we can both agree logically on. That there is existence of secret societies.
I think they're there, but I think to a fair extent they're a reflection of human nature. You tend to interact more with your peer group. If you move in rich circles, more and more rich people with more power will naturally interact. So a fair amount of that is just what you or I would do in a similar situation.
I agree. I agree with you.
I'm not condoning it. It can have really bad fallout because you can end up with a bubble of elites with too much money who don't realise the negative impact of their decisions on most of the people down on the ground. That's in the rich-poor divide as a problem.
But you know, when it interferes with democracy and a person's duties as a state leader, that's when it becomes a concern. For example, Bilderberg meetings. This is something that is now getting more and more traction. People are more and more aware of these meetings take place of state leaders, of
devil's advocate
CEOs.
Why wouldn't the state leaders want to occasionally get together and have private conversations?
But let me just finish this point. This might answer your question. So when an elected official, alongside heads of companies, CEOs they have a responsibility to their shareholders. So both sets of groups have responsibilities to their dependents, to put it bluntly. They are meeting in secret. There's no minutes to those meetings. We don't know what's being discussed. We don't know which direction and which mergers are going to happen, which are going to affect the money of the awam, the people. Share prices are going to go up and down. This is, insider trading. This is dishonesty. This is democratically elected people.
If they argue that they're meeting socially.
But they don't argue that though.
Well, if they did. If they said, we're having a social get-together.
Well, then on paper
inevitably sometimes we'll be talking about business, which is how any of our interactions will happen. I mean, you will naturally probably network with other Muslim commentators here and with camera crews. You naturally are in that peer group. Not everybody is in
It's actually mostly with non-Muslims, actually.
Sorry?
It's actually mostly with non-Muslims.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Hang on. I like that we're on politics.
But
I don't want to move too much into conspiracy stuff. If you don't.
It's not conspiracy stuff.
I think the rich-poor divide is a real problem. I think you've identified. Do you know Daniel Schmattenberger? I keep trying to big up Daniel Schmattenberger. He talks about the meta crisis, which are the multiplicity now of immediate problems we're facing that are beyond our control: accelerating technology, economics and population levels running out of control, AI, environmental collapse, and he's framing them all as part of the fact that unless we have some level of global regulation and governance, we can't counter these because everybody in the short term is motivated to compete with their neighbour, even though nobody wants to. Yeah? In the absence of global regulation, which doesn't fall into a dystopic Big Brother state, which is a real danger.
That falls within the conspiracy, the very conspiracy theory you're trying to move away from, which is a one world government.
Then maybe that's why he makes a difference between a governance and a government. Yeah. Because he says we're really stuck between a rock and a hard place.
I think that's just semantics. At the end of the day, if you give power to a few people that are pulling the strings, those people can be corrupted, those people can be manipulated, those people like the Pope, like certain muftis, etc., etc. When you centralize power and into kind of one individual,
but
it's problematic.
He totally acknowledges this. He says that we're in a position now. We've moved to Daniel Schmattenberger, maybe we shouldn't, but let me big him up for a minute, because if you see him online, hugely articulate and a good guy. And with a good spiritual core, I think. He's not just a soothsayer, he likes human nature and he's actually very positive. So he says our situation right now is akin to somebody who's gone down the bowling yard and you've got two alleys. And on the left, you don't want the ball to go down either alley. But these alleys are getting closer and closer together. Because on the one hand, you've got bad short-term incentives that all corporations face and individuals face, where if I don't keep competing with my neighbour using the lowest level possible of human rights or whatever, I'll get kicked out the marketplace. I want to be a good guy, but my business will go down if a sweatshop in China can undercut me, so now I've got to reduce the wages of my people and so on. So that's the left-hand problem, is the world accelerating towards more and more rich poor divide and exploitation, and nobody wants it, but you've got no global regulation to take care of it. So then you've got the other lane, and the other lane is, well, we'll have global regulation. He goes, yeah, but then the problem is there's an incredible probability of a dystopia and exactly the thing we're talking about. And he doesn't pretend it's not the case. His warning is that start. He goes, realistically, these are two unavoidable things, two unavoidable problems the species is now facing. Somehow we've got to work out a way of cutting through the middle. Yeah? And
does he give a solution?
Well, he a willingness to communicate, a willingness to communicate and have more open and educated debates where you try and
open and educated debates, not secret meetings not
secret meetings.
They go on their yachts.
When, for example, you listen to a debate, you want to listen to the best advocates for each position talking. You don't want one person who's like the world heavyweight champion on their topic, just shooting fish in a barrel with some idiot. I want to discuss.
When you say idiot, don't talk about Destiny Live.
Okay. It's not that. But anyway, you want the best representative. For example, when Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson debate, Jordan Peterson says the person I like to debate most is Sam Harris, precisely because he's my best opponent. He gives me the strongest arguments. He makes me think more incisively.
I agree with you.
So you want that level of debate to be encouraged.
Yes.
What we've got at the moment is a ridiculously polarised, dumbed-down level of debate occurring.
Yes.
Where it's largely about screaming matches and simplicity. You want people to look at the counter-arguments to what they believe. Steel man your own position. He'll identify, as I think you mentioned, that people being beholden to their shareholders by law means it puts corporate interests ahead of the interests of the wider community. Yeah? That's a problem. Also, one you'll like, he identifies interest, which in Islam I think you're against.
Yes.
He identifies that as being a driving problem because it's.
I think even Christians are against interest as well.
Well, yeah, interest and money I think is a good thing because you don't want to barter. But interest is not an inevitable byproduct of money. And interest means that, he will argue, the economies are compelled to keep growing exponentially, and you can't have infinite growth into a finite space. There's got to be a threshold where things start breaking down, and we're probably hitting that threshold. So you want to re-question the wisdom of interest, which Islam, to its credit, has done. So there may be an overlap there, another reason why you might want to give him a look. So he's looking at this meta-crisis on that level. Thanks for hearing me out on that, because it wasn't the topic we started.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, look, any theories to how we can limit this, I want to use a word, but I'll use a different, this blank beep show that
we
way.
Call it the meta-crisis.
Yeah, let's call it the meta-crisis.
Okay, the meta-crisis.
So, yeah, there is a meta-crisis, and there are definitely certain fundamental issues. I mean, Keith, I think Keith O'Neill or whatever his name is, I think he's somebody that says that people say it's the Jesuits or it's the Masons, it's this, it's that. But in his opinion, it actually can be traced down to control of the banking and the banking sector and the control of money and economy that's limiting people from exercising their moral decisions, frankly.
Yeah.
Because when you have control over a very important fundamental aspect of life, then it's very easy to control people. Don't know if you've seen, it's a very good movie by it's ironic, the actor's Justin Timberlake, but it's called On Time.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah, fantastic.
The premise is,
it's brilliant.
I love movies. The premise is superb.
It's fantastic.
You might want to tell the audience.
Yeah, so it's, I mean, the bartering currency of that time is time.
Yeah.
That for you to live longer, you get more time. And if you're to purchase stuff, you give time. And people that are rich, they obviously have decades and they have years, etc., etc. So that was a very interesting concept of taking something which is somewhat God-given and corporatizing it and turning it into a thing that can be bought and sold.
I love that you like that. It's really.
I love those
an example
movies.
of how this plays out in their society. You end up.
So, Habibi, how are you? Right? Yeah.
What are you guys talking about? If you don't mind.
A lot of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. At the moment, we're talking about corporations and stuff. Before we talk about Israel, Palestine.
Nice one. I'll leave you to it.
Well,
You're in the park for the next few hours, isn't it?
Yeah, inshallah.
Inshallah.
An example of how this plays out is rich people tend to have buttons
Yeah.
on their clothing. Poor people tend to have zips because you can do a zip up faster than buttons. Buttons.
Which
take
movie?
4 times. In
Okay.
the film you're talking
Right,
about.
right.
So that's the fashion changes.
Wow.
The clothes that you wear say, I have enough time to do this. Yeah. So that's a practical example you can see of how it would affect every tier of activity.
I like all these. I would say, like certain people have the opinion. I think Dr. Bruce Lipton I think he's the one who said that. Yeah, I think he said that Matrix wasn't a movie. It was a documentary. Which I think.
If we're doing movies for a minute, could you indulge me for a minute and a half?
Yeah.
I think this is perfect. And I've discussed this, but I've never shown it before. Hang on. So, do you know the IMDb?
Yeah.
Okay, right. So people know. The IMDb is the Internet Movie Database where it's got all of the films, and you can vote on a scale of 1 to 10 for films, okay? And that's a printout for a particular film
Yes.
of how popular it was. I'm not sure that's the one I'm going to show you now. That's the one I'm going to show you, okay? So that's a printout. People have rated it from 10 to 1, so 30% of people gave that film a 7. Okay, so you understand what this bar chart is, yeah?
So that means most people have voted for that number, yeah?
Yeah, it means 17,000 people, 5.4% thought this film was a 9.
Yeah.
And 11,000 people, 3.7% thought this.
It was a 4,
So they were asked the question, how good is this film? And that's how the curve came out, okay? Do you want to guess what film that is? Don't worry, I'll just tell you on the first one, but there's 4. That film is The Fast and the Furious, okay? I only mention it because most people know what it is. And you go, okay, I can believe that's the curve you'd get. I'm going to show you 3 more and you'll get the punchline, okay? Next film. Do you want to guess what film that is?
If you even Fast and Furious, I wouldn't have guessed that.
I just wanted to do the one which was an average. Now, from this, you can see it's got overwhelmingly positive, but it's still got a curve on it.
I'd probably attribute that to the like of The Godfather.
Okay, nice try. Yeah, actually, Oppenheimer.
Oh.
I'm being topical, okay? So this is Oppenheimer. Now let me show you that, and then we'll get to the point. There is a punchline. Okay, this film. Want to take a guess?
Because you're being topical, I'm thinking you're going through some recent ones. Barbie?
Well done. Perfect. Okay, it's Barbie. And the reason that's Barbie is you'll notice, although it's got that realistic curve, there's a bit more at the ends here where it was more controversial. So some people going 10, some people going 1. Yeah? Okay, so now I'm going to bring us back on topic. You want to guess what that is?
Ooh. Wow.
Yeah, wow. You won't know, and it doesn't matter, okay? That is a documentary called Israelism. okay, which I haven't seen, but I hear it's made by some Israeli younger people in Israel who are of the opinion that their culture's been brainwashing them towards Zionism, and they've had an awakening. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And what you're seeing here is this insane polarization where everyone thinks it's either the best thing ever made or the worst. Now, I haven't seen it, but what I know is that's not a healthy situation. When people's perception of reality lacks any nuance that we saw in the other ones, you lose the ability. You lose the ability to make any kind of objective critique of your own position or the other person. All you can ever do is point at them and go, you're wrong.
Yeah.
And you're correct. If you look at them, they're clearly wrong. So I can stand here, point at them and go, you're wrong.
Yeah.
And I can stand here, point at them and go, you're wrong.
Yeah.
But nobody's being right anymore. Rightness means having a bit more nuance.
Which you have had in our discussion, and that's why.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So was that worth chucking?
Well, I like that sort of stuff. Like I'm into that sort of stuff. I appreciate art in whatever form. Art is art.
Great. Okay, this is going way too well. How do we turn it into a screaming match?
I think let's leave it there for now, and then let's touch base later. I mean,
yeah,
it's nice to have some wins sometimes. It's nice to
absolutely
leave things at a positive juncture.
Yeah, this has been a real breath of fresh air. Seriously, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Really
I had a feeling it was going to go like this anyway, because I've obviously.
I actually didn't. I'd read you wrong, and I'm sorry.
No,
I've
it's all right.
seen some of your videos, and for some reason I got the impression that.
Yeah, I was surprised by that as well, because normally I rarely get that sort of.
No, I was definitely wrong,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
always nice to discover you're wrong. It's often it's more interesting to discover you're wrong than that you're right. So, good. Thank you.
My pleasure. I'll just take these off you. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'll just take these.
Here you go.